Head coaches get named. We've seen Anthony Lynn with the Los Angeles Chargers and Vance Joseph with the Denver Broncos. But we still want to keep this conversation to see if the NFL is doing enough to promote minority progress in the coaching ranks. And let's start with you, Tiffany, because you've got some firsthand experience on this subject.
I do, yeah. My father, former player, turned into a former coach, and he told me this really just a great story that I hadn't heard before about his time with the Patriots. And Raymond Berry was the head coach at the time. My father's playing career, it ended due to injury, but they approached him and said, you know, we want you to be a coach. We want you to be a defensive assistant right now. My dad thought, no, I should probably, you know, take a step back, start in high school, work my way up. But they told him, you'd be crazy if you don't take this now because you'll never get back up here. And one of the things my father told me about that staff was that this was a group of guys, his coach, they were colorblind. And so actually the defensive staff members, they sat him one of his first days on the job in the meeting room. They told him, no, you're going to teach us the plays today. You're going to go up to the grease board, as my dad called it.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. But it's something like that he told me that it's just about having an opportunity. And those guys were a group of guys, Raymond Berry, Don Shinnick, Ray Hamilton, I could go on, that weren't afraid of to let someone have an opportunity. He said there were no egos in that organization at the time. And something else that he also brought up was how even now what we're seeing is there's a lot of black coaches on staffs, but they're not necessarily in positions where you'll see them be elevated. Maybe they're the secondary coach or the running back coach like we talked about.
That's a great point because we still need to have black coaches have opportunities created for them. You know, very seldom do you see them talked about as being gurus,
correct,
or geniuses. And really, even I go back to what Terry Bradshaw, exactly. I go back to what Terry Bradshaw said about Mike Tomlin earlier back in the regular season, where he talked about, I don't know what Mike Tomlin does. That stuff is demeaning.
He's a cheerleader.
He's a cheerleader, and it's undermining. And what happens is owners hear this kind of stuff. It doesn't affect Mike Tomlin, but it affects the guys who come up behind him because what Terry Bradshaw is saying that there's no real skill to what this guy does except for just being a player's coach. And that's the stuff that we have to really focus on now with the Rooney Rule, getting beyond like just are we hiring people, but how are we treating people? How are we respecting the position?
And Mike Tomlin is exhibit A of why the Rooney Rule, I believe, has been good and should still continue. Back when Bill Cowher stepped down as Steelers coach, Russ Grimm and Ken Wisenhunt were in-house candidates. It was believed to be a two-man race, and they were both real good candidates. Mike Tomlin blew doors in his interview and ended up getting that job, and he's been great, by the way. I'll take that cheerleader coaching my team anytime. But, you know, there was you talked about Raymond Berry. You know, Bill Walsh was very, very committed to this, created an entire program. Because that was a different era. You know, young fans don't realize there was an entire generation of coaches that got lost in the wash. Your Sherm Lewis's, Willie Shaw, David Shaw's father, guys who would have been head coaches, I believe, in today's landscape, who just never got those opportunities. So we're getting better. But, Steve, I'd like to see it get to the point where it's like black quarterback, where people don't even think about it anymore.
And it's still getting lost in the wash. We have to have advocates, guys. We all talk to people. And when you hear about a rising potential black candidate, and I like to look at the Packers defensive staff. I mean, they have so many, you know, guys like Darren Perry and Joe Witt and so many guys who seem like they'd be perfect. They've taken, you know, undrafted free agents and turned them into Pro Bowlers. You never hear about them. You don't hear the advocates out there. And, Jeff, you spent time with Bruce Arians, the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. And when I talk to people like Doug Williams, you know, the former Washington Redskins quarterback, Buccaneers quarterback, a pioneer, he says Bruce Arians is a guy to look at because he is grooming black coaches for opportunities, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Harold Goodwin's his offensive coordinator. He just hired Byron Leftwich as his quarterback coach. And usually quarterback coach, that's the transition to coordinator to head coach. And when we see someone like Bruce Arians actually reach back and be an advocate, I mean, how important is that? Because from what I've heard in the NFL, there is very few. Bruce Arians is the rare commodity to threaten other potential coaches who think they're going to get that job by putting a black coach in that position.
Well, it's huge. And to go back to what Tiffany just said about, you know, coaches being pushed into certain positions, coaching the running backs or the receivers where it's safe. I've had coaches tell me that certain coaches will not hire you because you become too popular with the players. You have too much hold over the players, and they feel uncomfortable with that kind of relationship being built underneath them. So, yeah, you have to have coaches who are willing to say, I'm going to take a young guy and put him in a position to succeed. put him in position to where people can see how dynamic he is, what kind of ideas he may have. That is really one of the next steps in this process.
Progress is absolutely being made, but the Rooney Rule, it does need to stay in place because there's a lot of people who aren't going to give guys opportunities